Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another and the final episode of our series highlighting the contributions of Muslims of color, Muslims of African descent, African American Muslims to Islamic history, culture, religion, etc. And it's sad we only were able to do, in the time that we had available, 8 installments, because there is so much to be said, so many individuals of color who have made major contributions, and I just wish we had more time to say more. But today, I just feel that no discussion of this topic would be complete without mention of Malcolm X. And so today, inshallah ta'ala, we will be speaking about Malcolm X as the final Muslim hero of color, an Afro-American or African-American Muslim who made a tremendous contribution to the history and the religion and the culture that we believe in and hold so dear. So when the average Muslim, brothers and sisters of non-African descent, is asked about the legacy of Malcolm X as viewed through a purely Islamic lens, a fair reply would be, it's complicated. But a Muslim of African descent, especially the African descendants of American slaves, will likely deem it even more difficult to articulate who Malcolm was and what he meant to them, because their perception is influenced by Islam and the African American experience simultaneously. The part of us influenced by our blackness will likely describe Malcolm X, rahimahullah ta'ala, the way Ozzie Davis did when he eulogized him after his death. He said, "Here, at this final hour, in this quiet place, Harlem has come to bid farewell to one of its brightest hopes, extinguished now and gone from us forever. It is not in the memory of man that this beleaguered, unfortunate, but nonetheless proud community has found a braver, more gallant young champion than this Afro-American who lies before us, unconquered still. I say the word again as he would want me to, Afro-American Malcolm, who was a master, was most meticulous in his use of words. Nobody knew better than he the power words have over the minds of men. Malcolm had stopped being a Negro years ago. It had become too small, too puny, too weak a word for him. Malcolm was bigger than that. Malcolm had become an Afro-American, and he wanted so desperately that all his people would become Afro-Americans too. There are people who will consider it their duty, as friends of the Negro people, to tell us to revile him, to flee even from the presence of his memory, to save ourselves by writing him out of the history of our turbulent times. Many will ask what Harlem finds to honor in this stormy, controversial, and bold young captain, and we will smile. Many will say, turn away from this man, for he is not a man but a demon, a monster, a subverter, and an enemy of the black man. And we will smile. They will say that he is of hate, a fanatic, a racist who can only bring evil to the cause for which you struggle. And we will answer and say to them, did you ever talk to Brother Malcolm? Did you ever touch him or have him smile at you? Did you ever really listen to him? Did he ever do a mean thing? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance? For if you did, you would know him. And if you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood. This was his meaning to his people. And in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. However, we may have differed with him or with each other about him and his value as a man. Let his going from us serve only to bring us together now. Consigning these mortal remains to earth, the common mother of all, secure in the knowledge that what we place in the ground is no more now a man, but a seed, which after the winter of our discontent will come forth again to meet us. And we will know him then for what he was and is, a prince, our own black shining prince, who didn't hesitate to die because he loved us so. This, brothers and sisters, is how the African in us is likely to express its feelings about Malcolm. But Islamically, we may struggle to reconcile between all the good that was Malcolm, the good he did, and the good he tried to do for people of color. Reconcile between that and his association with un-Islamic beliefs and heresies presented and passed off as Islam. Beliefs like the belief that Wallace default was God incarnate, that Elijah Muhammad was God's messenger sent exclusively to the black man in America, groping aimlessly in the wilderness of immorality and spiritual infidelity. The belief that resurrection is not physical but merely mental. Blacks are mentally dead and are given life by following the teachings of the Nation of Islam. That heaven and hell are not real places in the hereafter, but rather figurative for a good life or a bad life in this world. And the belief that the white man is the devil, that all white people without exception are devils. The Muslim in us may question how to reconcile all of this. He changed, we'll say. The end of his life, he changed. Converted to Orthodox Islam, made the pilgrimage which washed away all of his previous misdeeds born out of ignorance. Malcolm's beliefs and ritual practice at the end of his life were evolving. He, like many of us, was a work in progress. So who was Malcolm? And what can we learn from his life and legacy? What I want to do in the time that we have left is I want to mention 4 events from Malcolm's life. There's so many events that we could mention and so much we could say, but I'm going to mention 4 events, ala ujala, summarize them, and then mention some of the lessons we can take from his life. I wish we had more time to discuss it, but we'll try to do what we can the time that we have before Salat al-Isha. So the first event, I entitled it, Made Bitter by the Bitter Taste of Racism. So Malcolm, rahimahullah ta'ala, when he was in his early teens, when he was a teen or a tween, somewhere between teen and tween, he went to Mason Junior High School, which was predominantly white school. And Malcolm, along with a few younger kids at the detention home where he was staying, because his mother was committed after the murder of his father, he and those students from the detention home were the only African-American children that attended this Mason Junior High School, And Malcolm was actually quite popular and considered to be a novelty among the white students. He was like a mascot, as he called himself in his biography. He excelled in English and history. His English teacher, Mr. Ostrowski, was the one whom Malcolm admired the most. Mr. Ostrowski would always lecture the class on striving to achieve success and give advice about how to become something in life. He would give them advice. Hey, do this, do that, give them pointers, and you'll become something in life. On the one hand, Malcolm faced discrimination at Mason Junior High School as well, though. So on the one hand, he had a teacher who was encouraging him, or so he thought. And on the other hand, this teacher would speak generally about, hey, students in my class, make something of yourselves, and these are some pointers on how to do it. So he thought that this particular Mr. Ostrowski was encouraging him and all of the other students, black or white. On the other hand, he faced discrimination and people who told him, bad things and hurt his feelings. So he mentioned that he had a history teacher, Mr. Williams. He detested him because he always made, as he called them, nigger jokes. Mr. Williams mocked African American history and even inflicted his personal prejudices of African Americans on the class, calling the race at large lazy and dumb and shiftless. And this personal encounter with racial discrimination was a factor that played into Malcolm's eventual hatred of the white race and advocacy of race separation. He mentions it in his biography. But that really wasn't the thing that pushed him over the edge. What pushed him over the edge was during his 8th grade year at Mason High School. Malcolm reached this pivotal point in his life. His favorite teacher, that Mr. Ostrowski, which we mentioned earlier, asked Malcolm about his career plans for the future. He said, "What do you want to be, Malcolm? What do you want to be? What do you want to do after school?" And so Malcolm, because he was such a good student, he got such good grades, and he was so well liked, he expressed his aspirations to be a lawyer. So Mr. Ostrowski, he said, "Come on, man. You've got to be realistic about being a nigger." That's what he told him to his face. Somebody he liked and respected and looked up to, and when he was giving those general speeches about make something of yourselves and aspire to do great things, and these are some suggestions and some advice on how you can do that, Malcolm thought he was talking to him, but he wasn't. He told him, you have to be realistic about being a nigger, a lawyer. That's no realistic goal for a nigger, he told him. This dialogue between Malcolm and his teacher proved to shape Malcolm as an individual. It was a point in his life where he realized that no matter how hard he worked, he would always be hindered by white supremacy. This prompted Malcolm to begin to lose motivation academically. He began to feel a restlessness with Mason in that school. And ultimately, he dropped out and stopped going to school and moved to Boston, where he had an older sister living. 3 lessons here really quickly, Juan. One of the things that this teaches us, this part of his life, it teaches us what happens when people of color are given the same opportunities as their white counterparts. They excel. They generally excel. And the proof is that Malcolm, he was basically an orphan. His mother was in a detention center. She had gone insane after the death of her husband, the vicious murder of her husband. And her children were just kind of spread about. And Malcolm was in a detention center, in an orphanage, basically. And he was put into this school. He was planted in this fertile soil, and he blossomed. He said he was one of the best students. He became the president of his class. He was at the top of his class in terms of his grades. He excelled. Another lesson, we also see what happens when mentors and people in positions of influence encourage young people to unlock their hidden potential. And they give them constructive advice on how to set goals in life and reach them. Malcolm, when he was told that he thought that the message was being directed at him, when he was included in it, when he was told, strive to become something in life. Strive to make something of yourself. Set goals and reach your goals. And he thought that message was for him too. He did just that. But we also see what happens, which is the 3rd lesson, when mentors and people in positions of influence discourage and dissuade young people regarding their ability to make something of themselves. Because of their handicaps, whether real or simply imposed by society, this makes them lose hope and see no point in trying and ultimately give up. It can also ignite the fire of hatred in their hearts and send them down a destructive path. Sometimes that destructive path could be crime. It could be spiritual infidelity, a person just disbelieving. And in this case, the case of Malcolm, it sent him down the path ultimately of reverse racism, or racism in reverse. The second chapter, or the second part of his life that I want to mention, I've titled it From Miscreant to Black Muslim. So Malcolm, when he went to Boston and ultimately spent some time in New York and kind of bounced back between Boston and New York after leaving Mason Junior High, dropping out, he basically resorted to a life of crime. He became a hustler, he became a pimp, a drug dealer, a numbers runner, armed robber, stick-up kid, bootlegger, the leader of a burglary ring, and ultimately a drug addict. He admitted in his biography that he became addicted to drugs, some hard drugs, as well as marijuana, etc. And he described himself at that point in his life as a predatory animal. His speech, he said, was filled with profanity. He became a major cynic, didn't believe in anything, skeptical about everything, hopeless, and a virulent atheist. He was ultimately caught in the act of a crime. He was thrown in jail or prison, penitentiary at that time, for 8 years. Spent 8 years in prison. And he was so hateful and so hard to reach that he got the nickname Satan while he was in prison. But ultimately, he found what he thought at the time was Islam and changed his life entirely. Did a complete 180. Gave up drugs, gave up profanity, gave up immorality, and became an upright, moral human being. And the lesson that this teaches us, I'll mention one lesson. It's not up to us to determine who is a lost soul or who is beyond saving. That's not for us to determine. And it's not for us to say that someone is so evil and so bad and they've done so many bad things that they can't be corrected, they can't be brought out of the muck and the filth and made whole again, purified, cleansed with faith. It's not for us to say that. As you can see how far and how criminal he had become, how cynical he had become, and how he became such a perfect believer in what he thought was Islam at the time. And I want to mention a personal story, personal experience. I remember once I was working in a particular masjid quite a few years back, and we were having a class, and somehow in the class it came up about the importance of teaching and spreading Islam, giving da'wah, and who should be targeted for da'wah. And I remember there was a particular brother from an Arab/African country, which will remain nameless, who said that he believed firmly that the people who should be targeted for da'wah in America are white people. And that not too much time should be spent on targeting, for example, African Americans. And he tried to rationalize that by saying that if white people, accept Islam and they're taught Islam and become pretty well grounded in their understanding of Islam, they can call other people to Islam and people will be more inclined to listen to them because they are white. He actually said this out loud. And again, this is an erroneous type of thinking for the exact reason why we're mentioning here. That basically what we're saying is that we are determining because of a person's skin color, because of their socioeconomic status, whatever, that they're worth saving. They're worth the investment of time. They're worth the investment they're worth the investment of time. They're worth the investment of interest. They're worth the investment of whatever financial resources it may take to train them and to teach them, etc. And other people, because of their socioeconomic status or because of the color of skin, are not worthy of that investment. And that's wrong. Because we don't know who, if we plant the seed of Islam, the seed of faith in their heart, that seed will grow. And who will become such a knowledgeable and influential and charismatic caller that they can bring other people to Islam. We've seen examples of great Muslim scholars and influential personalities in Islamic history who were black, who dark skinned, of African descent. We don't know who Allah is going to use to bring people to Islam. So it's not our job to say this is a lost soul, this person is worthy of being saved, this person is not worthy of being saved. It's not up to us to do that. But rather we should spread Islam indiscriminately and teach all who are interested and let Allah decide who is best to use as a vessel or a tool for his message. ثم بعد ذلك, another chapter or event from Malcolm's life, and I've entitled it The Never-Ending Search for Truth. And here, as we said, Malcolm became a black Muslim, and we talked about some of their beliefs, and he became one of the, if not the greatest, one of the greatest preachers and propagators of this religion. And a lot of people accepted and entered into the fold due to his efforts. And he was a firm believer, faithful believer in the prophethood and messengership of Elijah Muhammad. And that he was indeed the messenger of God and the Mahdi, the one who had been sent, the savior, etc. And so ultimately it became clear to him that Elijah Muhammad was a charlatan, that he was not a legitimate prophet, and he had even been guilty of indiscretions. He had had illicit relationships with a number of his secretaries and had had illegitimate children with those secretaries. And it was so hard for him because he was such a firm believer and so strong in his faith in the religion in general and in the man himself, that it was a crisis for him, a crisis of faith, and he wrestled with it. But ultimately, when the evidence was so clear to him and in his face, he recognized and realized that I have to follow the truth. I have to be a man of principle, not a man of personality. And so he ultimately left the nation. When he first left the nation of Islam, he continued to carry its beliefs, believing in the religion, but ceasing to believe in the man, the personality. But then he was exposed to Orthodox Islam and ultimately went for Hajj. And when he went for Hajj, he said he met blonde-haired, blue-eyed Muslims from Bosnia, right? And from other parts of Europe, wearing the ihram garb and worshiping the way he worshipped. And so he wrote back and he said, but we were all practicing in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist. The white and the non-white. But on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought previously held, much of my thought patterns previously held, and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This was not too difficult for me despite my firm convictions. I have always been a man who tries to face facts. So he abandoned those beliefs because the proof was right there in front of him. And I say all that to say, I'm going to mention a couple lessons from that, is that one, it takes real courage to believe in something so strongly, and when irrefutable evidence is provided when irrefutable evidence is provided regarding its fraudulence, its erroneousness, you follow the truth wherever it leads. That shows real courage. That shows that you're a man of principle, which every Muslim should strive to be. A man of principle, not a man of personality. Brings us to the second lesson. We have to be incessant seekers of truth, following the proofs wherever they lead us. If you look at the Quran, you look at the Hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger repeatedly tell us, be people of truth. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, ittaqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Oh, you who believe, fear Allah and be with the people of truth. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, qul hatu burhanakum in kuntum sadiqeen. Say, produce your proof if you're truthful. If you really are following truth, you should be able to prove it and support it with proofs and evidences. Be people of truth. وَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولٍ إِن كُنتُمْ تُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَحْسَنُ تَأْوِيلًا. If you truly, if you differ in any matter, O believers, you're not sure, some people are saying the truth is here, some people are saying the truth is there, then take that difference of opinion back, hold it to the light of Quran and Hadith. إِن كُنتُمْ تُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. If you truly believe in Allah on the last day, this is what you'll do. ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَحْسَنُ تَأْوِيلًا. That is most superior and best for final determination. So the people of truth, they're always taking what they believe and holding up to the light of truth and making sure that the two match, that they're in sync. And if they're not in sync, they're prepared to abandon something they believe in all their life. Because the truth is not known by men, right? The truth is known Men are known by the truth. And so we don't judge truth by the personalities who promote it, but rather we judge the personalities by the truth that is in the Quran and the Hadith. And so this is very important for us to learn from Malcolm's experience, that we have to be incessant followers of truth. And he reminds me so much of Salman al-Farisi. And some of you know the story of Salman al-Farisi and his long journey to Islam, and how at every turn, when he was pointed in the direction of truth and it meant that he had to leave what he had believed for a lengthy period of time, he did so, actively seeking the truth and not concerned about the personalities involved. Last but not least, from the experiences of Malcolm before we close, is that I entitled this, Born Muslims Have a Responsibility to Properly Represent Islam and to Guide Converts. And this is taken from a part of his biography, rahimahullah ta'ala, in which he repudiates the nation's theology. He's basically speaking against the Nation of Islam and what they believed in. But in the course of that, he criticizes the Muslims of the East, as he called them, for allowing ignorance of true Islam to fester and produce a religious faker among black Americans. That Elijah Muhammad was able to emerge and to preach a false form of Islam and call it Islam because Muslims from the East who knew better didn't come forward and refute him and repudiate him. And so basically what we learn from this part of Malcolm's biography is that that Muslims who were born Muslim and who know Islam, and it's in their blood, it's in their lineage for generations. Generations of them have been Muslim. They have a responsibility to represent Islam properly and to guide converts, people who were born Muslim. They have a responsibility. They should be leading the charge. They should be teaching and setting a proper example. And they shouldn't sit idly by and say, let them figure it out. They see people teaching and preaching the wrong thing, and they're like, it's none of my business. Let them figure it out. They'll figure it out on their own. No, they have a responsibility. If you know something, you have to say something. The Prophet said in the Hadith, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyiru biyadihi, falam yastati' fabilisani, falam yastati' fabiqalbi wa dhalika ad'af al-iman." He said that whoever amongst you sees something wrong, then he should what? Stop it. He should put a stop to it with his hands. If he can't, then what? With his tongue. You see people are saying the wrong thing about Islam and you know better. And you see that these converts who are unsuspecting, and they don't have the knowledge to know, to discern, then you step up and you tell them, hey, that's not the right way. That's not the right path. You step in. You intercede. You insert yourself. Prophet said in the Hadith, "Ballighu anni walau aya." Convey from me, even if it's a sentence, whatever you know. And Ibn Mas'ud, he said, "Man alima minkum shay'an falyaqul bihi." Whoever amongst you knows something, let him say it. Don't sit idly by while falsehood is being trafficked and you're like, well, I'm good. I know my deen. You know, I was born a Muslim, raised a Muslim, studied Islam from, primary school on up. And if these people are misguided, that's their problem. No, we have a responsibility. You have a responsibility. And Malcolm said that he himself was misguided and many other people were misguided and followed falsehood, followed the Nation of Islam, under the nose and with the knowledge of Muslims, as he put it, from the East, who knew better but said nothing. And so you do have a responsibility. Don't feel like you're not responsible, you're not accountable. It's somebody else's problem. And there's a lot more that we could say, brothers and sisters, but unfortunately, Salat al-Isha is about 2 minutes away. So we have to close here. But I just want to summarize from everything that we've learned in these 8 or 9 episodes that there's a lot that Muslims of color, Muslims of African descent, African American Muslims have contributed to the history, the culture, the religion, etc., that we believe in and hold so dear. We need to recognize that. And we not only need to recognize it, but we need to highlight it. We need to have knowledge of it ourselves, teach and educate our own children and families about it, because it will change the way we look at each other in our communities. And that's so important because our community is supposed to be an example of racial equality, ethnic equality, in the absence of racism, ethnic prejudice, and color-based prejudice. And with that, brothers and sisters, we'll bring today's session to a close. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.